From playing president to becoming one, appealing to world leaders and fighting for his nation's survival against a Russian military onslaught, is the strategy and style of Ukraine's leader working? And if so, why isn't the West giving him what he wants? I'm Andrij Dobriansky, and today's newsmaker is Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Well, he's used to being in the spotlight in Ukraine, but now Volodymyr Zelenskyy has the world's attention like never before. The former actor and comedian turned wartime president is earning near universal praise for his bravery in the face of Russian attacks. His frequent Facebook video updates and sometimes humorous commentary all project an image of a charismatic and confident leader. But while his messages are being broadcast loud and clear, European and NATO leaders have so far ignored his most urgent request, establishing a no-fly zone over Ukraine.
This is a terror that Europe has not seen for 80 years, and we're asking for a reply, for an answer for this terror from the whole world. Is this too much to ask for? To create a no-fly zone over Ukraine to save people. Is this too much to ask? To close our skies? I have a dream. These words are known to each of you. Today, I can say to you, I have a need. I need to protect our sky. I need your help.
Well, that was from Zelenskyy's address to the U.S. Congress on Wednesday, where he invoked America's collective memory of being attacked at Pearl Harbor and 9/11. He delivered a similar message to the British House of Commons last week in a speech that drew comparisons to Britain's wartime leader, Winston Churchill. His rhetoric has resonated across Europe and the world. His impassioned plea for nations to come to Ukraine's defense has brought billions of dollars in financial and military aid and seen Western powers impose unprecedented sanctions on Russia. And on Tuesday, in an unparalleled show of support, 3 European leaders traveled to the Ukrainian capital by train to meet Zelenskyy in person. The prime ministers of Poland, Slovenia, and the Czech Republic concluded that further urgent measures need be taken. So let's take a closer look at the man who's not only inspiring a nation, but leaders across the globe. At 44 years old, Zelenskyy is significantly younger than his counterparts, the majority of whom are in their 60s. He's a native Russian speaker who grew up in the eastern half of Ukraine, which at the time was part of the Soviet Union. He's Ukraine's first Jewish president, leading many to question Putin's assertion that he's somehow a neo-Nazi. The political outsider beat Petro Poroshenko in the 2019 election after campaigning on an anti-establishment, anti-corruption platform. He also promised to end the war in Donbass. His career as a stand-up comic began at the age of 17. He then went on to star in several feature films. He was cast as the lead of the Ukrainian TV series Servant of the People, where he played a high school teacher thrust into the role of president.
Здрасте. Василий Петрович Голобородько? Да. Доброе утро, господин президент.
Hello?
Good morning, Mr. Goloborochka. Can I connect you with Angela Merkel?
Yes, you can connect.
Hello. My congratulations. We decided to take your country to the European Union.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, wow. Oh, I'm so happy. Yes. Thank you very much. All the Ukrainians and all of our country, we've been waiting for this so much time.
Ukrainian?
Yes, Ukrainians.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's a mistake. I was calling to Montenegro.
So has that background as an actor and performer served President Zelenskyy in this most challenging real-life role as a wartime leader? Joining me now to assess that and more from Miami is Evan Nierman. He is the founder and CEO of the media consultancy firm Red Banyan. Paul Ingram joins us from London. He's a senior research associate at Cambridge University working on international security. And from New York, Andrij Dobriansky, a political analyst and chair of UN Affairs at the Ukrainian World Congress. Thanks all so much for being with us. You know, I have to say that if the trajectory of Zelensky's life over the last year, you know, were pitched as a movie, people might think the plot sounds just ridiculous. Yet here we are, an actor and regular on Dancing with the Stars even, now leading an entire country through pretty unimaginable circumstances. Some even say he is defending the front line of what could be World War III. Evan, let me start with you. How's he doing?
Well, I think it's remarkable. I think it's indisputable that his prior career has prepared him for this moment in terms of his ability to communicate effectively. But I think going beyond his clear communication skills, which he developed as a comedian, a performer, an actor, is the president has risen to the moment. And he has become someone who has been an inspiration, not just to his people who are fighting under very, very difficult circumstances, but he has truly galvanized the world and inspired people all across the globe. So I would say he's doing better than anyone could have ever expected, and it has been truly remarkable to see the leadership that President Zelenskyy has brought to his people.
So would you say he is using his acting talents, and I mean, not that they're not sincere, to continuously, you know, plea for assistance and ask especially for that no-fly zone, you know, and keep, above all, keep Ukraine the priority of global attention?
He has done an outstanding job of changing policy based on his mastery of communication. And in terms of the war, I'm not going to speak about the military conflict itself, but in terms of just the communications war, he is absolutely defeating his adversary, Putin. And you see such a disconnect and such a difference between the old world Russian way of trying to control a narrative, utilize propaganda, shut down communication within Russia, clamp down on social media, threaten to jail journalists if they don't toe the party line, whereas President Zelenskyy is operating in this new world of communication. He's broadcasting on an ongoing basis. He's coming across as authentic, which is always the key to connecting with an audience. He is out there every day. He's producing content. He is creating a narrative, and he is driving that narrative consistently. And I think he's doing a fantastic job. And what's most remarkable is that we're witnessing the first modern day warfare where communication using social media has really become a critical tool in the fight.
Okay, let me ask Andrij, as a Ukrainian American, I mean, do you share that high praise of Zelenskyy then as a communicator, especially under these circumstances?
Oh, it's indisputable, as the previous guest said, the fact that he is not just communicating with people over social media regularly, but you see his effectiveness in delivering these speeches to parliament after parliament around the world. So that, you know, also speaks to a different level of communication. I think the other thing we should be aware of is the fact that he has, throughout his presidency, always searched for new connections with business leaders, with people traditionally not in communication with Ukraine, always try to get people like Elon Musk involved, or other non-traditional partners of Ukraine that you would think in a diplomatic term a leader would do. And I think you're seeing that pay off in the kind of reception that Ukraine is getting right now internationally, where so many people have just said this matters above everything else. And that's partially because of the outreach he had done up until this point.
It's amazing, Andrij, because there's also the question, in communications, of course, of language and translation. Speaking through a translator often diminishes a speaker's effect. That they can sound completely different, the intonation can be completely different, but that doesn't seem to be the case with Zelenskyy. Why is that?
Well, when he speaks on emotional terms, things that resonate with people, that's something that absolutely can get across with or without a translator. That, also the visual image he has around himself, where he's not in a suit, where either he's in a bunker or he's walking down the street and you can see the sandbags around him. That also does not require a translator. However, where translation does get things into a pickle is when there are those traditional exchanges with traditional media. So they will ask him a question that will be translated to him. The response will be translated back to him. And then what often gets people in trouble is the fact that that response that has been translated will then be addressed to another foreign leader in that foreign leader's language and then translated back. So some of these traditional back and forth that the traditional media was used to do is hampered by the language issue right now.
Okay.
But in terms of connecting directly, like you said, it's the visuals, it's the emotional aspect.
Right. You know, Paul, I'm going to ask if you're actually on the same page there, or if there's something you might, advise to change when it comes to the messaging and comms approach, especially in the big asks that Zelenskyy is after.
Yeah, so I would actually agree with everything that's been said up to now. Zelenskyy has been extraordinary in his communication. He is clearly of the people and is appealing to the people, not only his own, but across the world. I think also he's appealing, what hasn't been said is that he's appealing to people's instincts around protecting and around fighting. And clearly in this situation, the Ukrainians need to fight. And in that respect, he has been such an incredible galvanizing force. I work in global catastrophic risks. I think about communications quite a lot in those respects, and I see successes and failures all the time. For example, in climate change, we're all aware of climate change, and yet we failed. And the reason for that is because there's been so much effective communication by the fossil fuel industry. And that brings me to a very important dimension that hasn't been discussed yet, and I'm sure where we will part company, which is about responsibility. Now, the responsibility lies both with the communicator and those receiving it. So in terms of broadcasting, it's irresponsible for people simply to support Israel when they engage in atrocities against the Palestinians, or indeed today in Ethiopia, where the government is engaged in extraordinary genocide.
So where is Zelenskyy failing on those terms?
So in those terms, he's calling for a no-fly zone,
right, which
on the surface of it looks defensive, but it isn't. It absolutely isn't. And people don't understand the complexities around the actual imposition of a no-fly zone that would firstly be ineffective because most of the damage is coming from the ground through missiles, artillery, multiple launch rocket systems and the like. Secondly, it would actually involve the destruction of Russian facilities inside Belarus and Russia, such as radar, surface-to-air missiles, electronic warfare capabilities and the like. And if you weren't prepared to attack those facilities inside Russia, you would be opening your pilots to being shot down very, very quickly. But the other aspect is that much of the aerial attacks are coming from inside Russia using standoff missiles. So a no-fly zone would be ineffective as well. So I think. But
Paul, I mean, the flip side to that is that there could possibly a strategy here, and that if Zelenskyy doesn't get the no-fly zone he's requesting, the response from his allies instead could be to increase other levels of support because of that constant pressure he's been applying. More military hardware, for example, or work harder on sanctions on Russia. So it's a win-win.
Yes, I think that's right. And if that is his strategy, is to ask beyond what is reasonable and get something that is very effective, then all power to his elbow. And I certainly don't criticize him for anything, including calling for a no-fly zone. The responsibility is in those that receive the information. That's coming to my other side of this. It's not just the people who are involved in the broadcast, it's the people who are receiving it. The viewers of this program need to ask the question, where's this one coming from? This person that you're listening to right now? Because I have my biases and I have my particular agendas here. And my agenda is to communicate just how important global catastrophic risks are to us all. Ukrainians, Europeans, Americans, Russians, everybody. We need to find ways of going beyond the immediate conflicts that we are seeing on our TV screens right now, and think about how we engage in global strategies that are more cooperative.
Fair enough. Andrij and Evan, I can see you both disagree. Andrij, I saw your head shaking first. Go ahead.
Well, we also have to recognize, every one of us in this conversation, when we speak from a position of privilege, from a position of safety, that when people argue against the appeals that Ukraine is making, we need to understand that that arguing against those appeals means that we are comfortable with thousands of people dying. We are comfortable with little girls and children cowering and dying of dehydration. We are comfortable with maternity wards being bombed. That is what rejecting from a sense of logic, intervening in any way in Ukraine means for people. So we just have to be aware of that.
Then, Andrij, what about those who say that if you force, via this no-fly zone, if you force Western powers to shoot down Russian jets directly and have the West engage with Russia on a war basis, I mean, that would be effectively a declaration of war, then we could take this planet towards World War III, in which we would be witnessing millions of deaths.
Russian jets have been shot down. This is not Russian sovereign territory. When a Russian jet flies over NATO countries, they are absolutely at risk of being shot down, and they have been shut down. They have been shot down, even when they come over NATO territory for even several seconds. That did not and will not create a war just on the face of it. So when we're talking about Ukrainian sovereign territory, that's not for Russia to say whether they can fly unimpeded over that territory. If other countries want to, at Ukraine's invitation, go in there, that is absolutely the right of the Western Alliance.
Okay, Evan, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I certainly took issue with the comparison of this conflict with other conflicts, including in the Middle East. I don't think that the two can be conflated. I think the circumstances are completely different. I believe one of the things that Zelenskyy and the Ukrainians are doing very well is they are highlighting the fact that the Russians are targeting civilian infrastructure, that they are committing war crimes, that there is an intent to make the population suffer. And I think the reason why Russia is having such a hard time making a case for its invasion is that they ultimately have no case. And I think the world has come to understand that, and the world is buying in almost wholesale to the Ukrainian narrative, not the Russian narrative that somehow we need to denazify a country that's led by a Jewish president, any of the other nonsensical arguments that are coming out of Russia. So I think images matter, and the footage that of not just Zelenskyy himself and the former president appearing in the streets, members of parliament taking up arms, I think the images that are making their way across the world are what is galvanizing not just Zelenskyy, but also seeing is believing. And I think the more that people see what's going on, the more they understand that the global community needs to do whatever it can to bring this to a close as soon as possible.
Okay, Paul Ingram, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that there are comparisons that can be made. Today, we have images that are available to those that seek them out of people being burnt alive by militia within Ethiopia and the Tigrayan province. But they're not being shown on TV because it's not convenient to those people that have an agenda here. I'm not defending Russia's actions. I condemn them. I condemn Russia. I can say that over and over again. I don't, do not think that I'm defending Russia. But we do need to be quite careful about thinking about the way in which we're being manipulated now. I would like to say that beyond that, it's important for us to consider how we engage in support for Ukraine's territorial integrity without triggering World War III. Because I am privileged. I mean, I'm from Cambridge University. You can't get more privileged than that. Absolutely. Am I comfortable? No, I am not comfortable. This is not a comfortable situation for any of us. It may not be that the bombs are, it may be that bombs are not raining down on my head yet, but they may do. And that is important because whilst there are indeed thousands of people who are suffering from this invasion of Ukraine, there are hundreds of millions of people that could die from this if it gets out of hand. And we may not be able to get our heads around these numbers, but these numbers are absolutely crucial, critical. And if NATO gets involved in a war in Ukraine by imposing a no-fly zone, it could come to that. And I'm not fear-mongering when I say that. Okay. It's really critical that we consider the dangers of the use of nuclear weapons in this conflict.
We've spoken at length about that on various programs, of course, and you've heard across the news media globally constant mention of that issue. I would, if you don't mind, though, I'd like to go back. We're talking about Zelenskyy as a leader and as a communicator. Evan, since you are the media consultant on the panel, I want to look at, speaking of comparisons, comparisons with Zelenskyy to other leaders. His response, for example, to what's happening in Ukraine, to that of his counterpart, Mikhail Saakashvili, when Russia invaded Georgia back in 2008. And Saakashvili, for example, his development as a leader, over the months following the invasion and the years, many say he derailed. The pressure and other factors made him look less and less stable and more like a liability, even when what Russia had done to Georgia was wrong. That does not seem to be the case with Zelenskyy, but do you think he will continue to manage things that way because the pressure on him is so immense?
The pressure is absolutely immense, but he's shown a propensity to shoulder it and to persevere. And I would be surprised to see any sort of dissipation of that. I think that he has spoken in ways that are compelling when he's quipped, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. These are sound bites. These are memorable clips that I think have cemented, for now, his ability and his standing as a communicator. I do think that the way that Saakashvili communicated during the conflict that happened in Georgia, it was different. Also, there was not the large-scale bombing that we're seeing here. Certainly, there was a toll that took place, and I think Zelenskyy has risen to the moment in a way that Saakashvili didn't. I think there were also other complicating factors related to that war, and in terms of the timing and who struck first, et cetera. But I think Zelenskyy is in a class of his own in terms of his ability to both galvanize his people, to encourage them, but also, as my colleague stated, the impact that he has had by speaking directly truth to power and speaking to parliamentarians, and today he'll speak to a joint session of Congress. It's Zelenskyy's ability to communicate with lots and lots of different target audiences. That's what's separating him and making him so effective.
Right. Andrea, I imagine you also agree with that sentiment. I mean, and Evan was saying, quoting the "I don't need a ride" line when the United States offered to evacuate Zelenskyy. I mean, how powerful a message was that alone? The fact that he has stayed, he's been in bunkers, he's been taking these handheld videos from across the city. It means so much to the Ukrainian people to see him in there with them.
It's not just the one-liners, it's the visual mocking jabs at Putin. It's, constantly defying what this manipulator in Moscow wants to do. And it's been the case from the very beginning of the Zelenskyy presidency. We saw very much so that at the Normandy format in December of 2019, Putin had no idea how to react to this guy because there wasn't a playbook for him and he could go any way. And much in the same way, his responses, whether it's those one-liners that are just coming across in whatever language you're translating them in, or moving the microphone to demonstrate that he is actually in person and not being photoshopped into pictures like Putin is, he's defying that total control that Putin seems to project. I would, agree that there's a difference between what happened in Georgia. I do contend that, Russia did break the law there. Unfortunately, the international community did not respond as harshly in Georgia or Syria, and now we're having Ukraine. But also the situation is different given the fact that the entire country wasn't invaded, just like Ukraine is right now. So it's much more similar to the earlier invasion of Crimea and Donbass. And lastly, Ukraine is just such a larger country that once it is on this path, changing the populace to what happened in Georgia, which only in a matter of years, the opposition through Russian funding was able to change popular opinion of Saakashvili. That damaged him. But when you're talking about this large a country, this large a population, once they've crossed the Rubicon in terms of popular support, there's no changing that with any machinations from Russia.
Right. And you've alluded to his other messaging as well, which is, ignore Crimea, ignore what's happening in Ukraine at your own peril. I mean, Paul, that's similar to what you were saying too. This could get much bigger and much worse. We just have to pray that it can't. Paul, I wanted to give you a time to reply, but unfortunately we are completely out of time. But we will be talking again about this subject matter, of course, going forward in the days and weeks to come. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @the_newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrij Dobriansky. We'll see you next time.